The family of Jeremy Cohen, a French Jewish man who was fatally wounded after being hit by a tram, has said that antisemitism may have played a role in the incident. While the event was initially treated as a traffic accident, new video footage released by the family appears to show a gang of men attacking Mr. Cohen, prompting him to flee for safety without noticing the tram. Mr. Cohen is believed to have been wearing his kippah or skull cap during the attack, and the family have now called upon the police to reopen the investigation into his death, as they feel his visible Jewish identity played a role in his attacker's motivation. To talk more about this story, I'm joined by Campaign Against Antisemitism's Chief Executive Gideon Falter and CAA Head of Special Projects Catherine. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ellie.
So this is a shocking story, and Catherine, as a French Jew yourself, I'm wondering, were you surprised to read this?
I was shocked, but I was not surprised. It's a horrific and tragic story, but unfortunately, antisemitism in France has been a big problem for a very long time already. Many French Jews, and indeed Jews from across the world, feel that this is not taken seriously enough. And this case is a prime example. It has been the family who has had to do much of the work rather than the authorities. As you say, the police initially treated this as a traffic accident and closed the case for lack of useful footage and information. It was only when the family started asking questions, handing out flyers and post boxes throughout the neighborhood, and urging witnesses to come forward, that someone eventually came forward with the crucial video footage that showed that the victim was being attacked moments before his death. Several people, including high-profile French politicians, have suggested that this is another incident of the French authorities downplaying anti-Semitic violence. And given France's record, that doesn't seem far-fetched in the slightest.
Right, so let's talk about that record. Gideon, this week is actually the anniversary of the murder of Sarah Halimi, isn't it?
Yes, and as Catherine said, France has a terrible track record on this front, and Sarah Halimi's case is yet another reminder of how the French authorities treat anti-Semitic attacks. The footage in this case of Jeremy Cohen was actually released on Monday, 4th of April, which was the anniversary of the murder of Sarah Halimi. And for those who might not be familiar, she was a 74-year-old Jewish woman living in Paris. She was murdered in 2017 by a 27-year-old Muslim neighbour, Kobili Traore, who tortured her before throwing her out of a window, yelling Allahu Akbar and I killed the shaitan, which is an Arabic word for devil or demon. And there was all sorts of anti-Semitic vitriol heard during the attack. But in a disgraceful decision last year, France's Court of Cassation ruled that Mrs. Halimi's killer couldn't stand trial because he was high on cannabis whilst committing the murder. And in fact, last year, we at Campaign Against Antisemitism held a rally outside the French embassy in solidarity with French Jews opposing the Cour de Cassation's unjust ruling, joining simultaneous rallies around the world.
Do we not count? For those who are listening in the embassy, this may look like a small demonstration, but I know, were we not limited by COVID numbers, we would be a very large group of people here today.
People should not be allowed to kill Jews without some kind of punishment.
We want to challenge the injustice. We want to challenge the anti-Semitism, which we think is behind this very unjust decision.
I'm here today to represent MAS. We came here to stand for justice for Sarah Halimi and to let the Jewish community know that they have allies, and we commit to standing against anti-Semitism in all its forms, including Islamist theology, as was the case with the murder of Sarah Halimi.
Okay, and what happened after that? What happened as a result of this global outcry?
Well, it took a few months, but eventually it was announced that a French parliamentary commission of inquiry would be established in order to investigate the murder. In January of this year, the inquiry was closed, though, and the results of the 67,000-word report found that police arrived on the scene before Mrs. Halimi was killed. They waited outside her apartment during the entire incident. They claim that they were unable to hear her screams. And bafflingly, the report concluded that the officers, judges, psychiatrists, everybody involved in the case had done everything by the book. And it led to a disagreement between those on the investigating committee itself, with the report only being passed on a 7-5 vote, with Mayor Habib, the French parliamentarian who formed the commission, accusing police and fellow lawmakers of lying and engaging in a cover-up. And this is just the latest incident in a long litany of people who attack Jewish people in France being let off. Either their motivations are questioned later, or the facts are somehow compiled to omit the acts of anti-Semitism or the anti-Semitic hatred that motivated them.
Yes, and let's not forget that Sarah Halimi wasn't the only recent case. So it was also the case of Mireille Knoll, a Holocaust survivor, and she was murdered in her home after being robbed and stabbed 11 times, also by an Islamist neighbor in her building, aided by his mother and an accomplice. And again, during the murders, there was anti-Semitic rhetoric. This killing took place just 1 year after the murder of Sarah Halimi, but in this instance, the assailant involved did receive lengthy sentences. But even in this trial, an appeal was made to drop the charges of anti-Semitism despite the evidence. But thankfully, in this case, it was rejected by the Paris Court of Appeal. Okay,
so Catherine, if I can ask you, what do you think is the future of French Jewry?
A report by France's Jewish Community Security Services the other day said that anti-Semitic incidents in France skyrocketed by 75% in 2021. We have only discussed 3 cases here today, but there are so many more, stretching back years and years, some that are well known and others less well known. The situation in France is dire, and speaking personally, my family left France for the UK already some years ago after the Toulouse shooting happened. At that point, it became too much, and we had lost faith in the ability of the authorities to curb anti-Semitism in France. So the truth is that I pray for my community in France, but I honestly don't know how much hope remains.
From my own limited experience living in France 15 years ago, the situation there was already much worse than the situation in the UK is even now. And we'll see what the outcome of the Jeremy Cohen investigation will be, but I hope for the sake of his family, French Jews and European Jewry, that it provides clarity and above all delivers justice to someone who may be yet another victim of a grotesque and fatal anti-Semitic attack.